nine, eight, seven, six, five, four, three, two, one.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to our special guest interview here at the Newchip Q4 Demo Day and Global Startup Conference. I'm very excited to be joined today by Claes Fredriksson and Tuya from Liquid Wind to discuss the world of clean energy. Thank you guys for joining us and taking your time to present your company as well today. It's very excited to learn about Liquid Wind and the clean energy space. Before I get started, I'd like to share a bit more about your backgrounds with our audience. Claes is the CEO and founder of Liquid Wind. He has over 20 years experience in the green tech space in Sweden, Switzerland, Canada, Hungary, and Hong Kong. He has experience working on projects related to hydrogen and fuel cells, energy storage, EV charging, district energy, solar and ocean energy, and he certainly brings a breadth of experience to the clean energy sector. Tuya is the head of finance and investments at Liquid Wind. She joined Liquid Wind in 2019 and has over 10 years of experience combining finance and sustainability. She's helped purpose-driven organizations achieve their mission by setting out their financial and investment strategies and ensuring their effective implementation. We're really excited to hear her insights today. If you'd like to share some of the major trends that we've seen recently in the clean energy space. I'll turn it over to you two.
Thanks a lot, Clayton. Thanks for the nice introduction, and great to have the opportunity to be here and present our company, which comes all the way from Sweden, which is maybe not so far in digital world, but in physical world, it would be a decent distance to go. So clean tech trends are big and many, but the common theme, of course, is it's about decarbonization. Whatever we do, we need to decarbonize. And that's happening in a big way in many different sort of formats across the globe. And the other one is that renewable energy is getting cheaper. It's cheaper than oil, it's cheaper than gas, so it's almost cheaper than gas depending on where you are. And we've seen that huge growth of wind energy, solar energy, primarily. We see early stages of ocean energy. It's not that cheap yet, but the renewables as a replacement for the conventional fossil-based energy is a huge trend. So those I would think are the big ones that we see. And in our kind of context then, what's fascinating for us is that we're going from, in the past we used to use fuel to make electricity. We used coal or gas or whale oil or whatever it might be to make something that we could use, primarily electricity. And nowadays, in the phase of electrofuel, we're going to use that cheap electricity that I just talked about to make fuel. So when you make fuel from electricity, everything changes because now you can store that one commodity that we've never been able to store before in large scale and use it whenever you want. So for us, that is the huge sort of game changer and the transition that we're working through. And we're often, as we know, hydrogen comes into place as the enabler of that transition.
That's really interesting. I appreciate you sharing those thoughts. And of course, Liquid Wind is sort of on the forefront of some of those trends too. So it's great to hear that. So I'm curious, what do you see as some of the forces driving the growth behind the industry? I assume this is a industry that's well regulated. There's certainly a lot of corporate PR surrounding this, and there's a lot of media popularization around, especially the EV world with Tesla and Nikola. But where are you seeing some of the driving forces in growth?
I think you're sort of grabbing after a big concept, but I think you're into in the sector of transportation, how is it regulated and what are the changes? And you're pointing out so that the two phenomena in North America, which is spread, which is Tesla and soon to be Nikola, we hope. in terms of shifting, again, that using fossil fuel to using something else, electricity or hydrogen in the case of Nikola, to make kind of the way we move ourselves totally different. Now, there's of course a lot of regulation around how that should be done in terms of how we enable electricity to happen, how we enable the infrastructure of charging systems to be rolled out, which is a big issue. And then there's the other field of it, which we're in, which is, can we replace the fuel with a renewably produced fuel, whether a synthetic diesel or synthetic gasoline, or in our case, an electrofuel? And what are the implications if you do that? And obviously, there are a lot of people who've had a good life sort of serving the world with fossil fuel who are not necessarily too much in favor of a synthetic fuel replacing that fossil fuel. So there's lots of things that we need to get through to get kind of to the next level where we can have a greener, cleaner liquid fuel and get past the regulations.
Right. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I think that's kind of the sort of the 10,000 feet version. We are, for instance, fighting, I guess we have to say, with the blendability of the electrofuel that we produce in gasoline. In Europe, you can only put 3% in gasoline. In China, they happily put 15 or 20%. But we're stuck with a rule that says 3%, that we're trying to sort of grow to 5 or 10 or 15 so we can start to blend things in. And we have those types of things happening kind of in various parts of this transportation transition market all over the place. And they are both on a European level where we operate, they're on a member state, as we call it, on a national level, and they are on an international level in the IMO and on the shipping fuel side, where we deal with sort of the issues on a global level. So we have a person that only does that in our team. Just how do we deal with regulation and how do we get through to it?
Yeah,
certainly.
And if I may add on the driving forces, I think we can also add perhaps two different things that is influencing the trend. First one, I think, is definitely the business world and also the financing world as well, where now we see a drastic increase on the ESG investments and return on investment ESG. And you also see the big companies like BlackRock going into announcing that they're going to be divesting and they will be putting a lot more money towards ESG. So I think these driving forces of businesses trying to find alternative and more sustainable and long-term green projects is going to be continue to be growing. And I think that is going to be one of the main driving forces actually to enable these type of larger scale infrastructure green projects to happen. And then another thing is probably going to be more of a customer-driven effect. You see people like Greta Thunberg, who's actually from Sweden, driving, young people to demand change. At the end of the day, that is going to be the planet that we're going to live, for them. So they, I think, this year especially, have managed to have a significant impact where and how, the ambitions is going to be, because they do have a stronger voice. They're your future customers. If you can't get to what they want and what they want to see, there's no business for large oil companies.
Yeah, we're certainly kind of in an interesting spot where we have these societal pressures and folks leading the charge like Greta that take it to the corporate level. Now all of a sudden these corporations are having to become more aware and structure their businesses around more sustainable efforts. And then of course that goes even further up into those suppliers and companies like yourself that can really make that change. So that's really interesting. I'd like to back up for a second to something Claes was speaking to with the regulation. And I'm curious the response you've seen from governmental bodies to the emergence of clean energy. Is there any support or hesitation, or how are they reacting sort of to these emerging trends?
I mean, there's huge support in Europe for this. I mean, the European Union is driving the new Green Deal and is driving towards decarbonization by 2045 or 2050. So that's very strong on the policy and regulation side. It's coming in kind of every year, or every 6 months, there are new rules that come through the European Union and then are sort of pushed out to the member states, so they have to make their implementations. There's also been something called Horizon 2020, which is funding to support these programs. It's now shifted over to Horizon Europe. It's starting in 2021. And then in addition to that, they've pushed on what they call the EU ETS, the emission trading certificates that we've had for carbon dioxide, but the EU ETS Innovation Fund. So now there's a fund for another 10 billion euros. So that's sort of 14 billion US dollars to push green technologies. And they're all kind of in there to make it happen. The European Union came out with a strategy paper maybe 2 months ago, and it's extremely aggressive in terms of the conversion that needs to happen. So I think the will is there, the mechanisms are being put in place. It doesn't make it super easy to make it happen because there are big transitions that need to happen, but they are there and they're being pushed through to the different countries as well. So it's definitely moving, and there's absolutely no question any longer. We need to do it. We have to do it. We will do it. And there's not a matter of kind of fighting back. This is the new paradigm. And you might have seen that Unilever, big company here in Europe, they came out with a new strategy for 1 billion euros to invest into them making their feedstock material into their washing detergents or laundry powders, whatever, greener and more climate friendly. And it just came out a couple of days ago. And those are the kind of things we see from company after company to make things happen.
Well, that's pretty incredible. And you know, the old saying, money talks. There's certainly a lot of support when we're talking about billions of dollars going into this type of research and developing the industry. That is certainly quite a bit of support and speaks well to the future and to the growth of the industry as well.
But in all fairness, it's been a long time coming, right? I mean, we've been on
Absolutely.
this scale for the last 30 years, I would say, in Sweden with district energy and pushing kind of biofuels and these things and pushing garbage separation for that matter. So it's a long time coming, and it's slow, and then eventually it sort of takes off, or eventually it sort of people internalize it and say, well, of course we have to do this. But it does cost more. I mean, it costs more. We have fossil fuel here and our fuel is here, and somebody's going to pay the gap. And that's still not easy to get that through. Absolutely.
That kind of brings me to, to my next question here. I'm curious how the focus of the clean energy world kind of differs around the globe. How is it changing and where is it changing, and really what makes the Scandinavian region different sort of than the rest of the world, as that seems to be quite a bit of your focus.
So we let Tuya start answering, and then I can fill in.
Yeah, sure. I don't know what we can say. I mean, globally, we know today the demand for green energy. I mean, the interest is there, the money is there. Now, the companies like ourselves, the ones who are trying to develop the technology, would have to, push forward and do it. And of course, there is an aspect of actually lobbying the oil companies, lobbying, and we would have to basically try to push ourselves through this mist of fossil fuel and actually bring it to the market. And I think today if you look at what liquid wind is doing or what other green hydrogen companies are trying to do, is heavily based on what is the electricity price is going to be. And if we see in liquid wind in Sweden, for example, for the past 10 years, there has been huge surges of renewable wind farms being built. And I believe Sweden is still in the leading force of onshore wind farms. And we know our Danish friends in Denmark now have promised to put up probably the biggest offshore wind farms. So we do know, and we do see this trend of long-term renewable power prices going to be extremely favorable for companies like ourselves. So strategically, it is an important location for any business in our industry to be located in such regions that would enable the business, basically.
I mean, if I just add to that, I mean,
yeah, of course.
We on our side, we look for low-cost power prices. As Tuya was saying, we've seen it in Denmark in a big way. We've seen it in Sweden. We see the solar belt in whether it's be southern Spain or the Middle East or Australia or India for that matter, with a lot of growth in terms of electricity generation, but also on other kind of trendier stuff. I mean, Japan, Korea are heavy on fuel cells. They lead the world in fuel cells, and I think they will continue to do that. We see kind of other trends in North America. You probably know better than we do what's going on there, but there are some things that are growing very strongly in North America, and other things are not happening as strongly. I mean, so, but the overall, I think, theme is it's, as I said before, it's electrification and it's decarbonization, and you will use whatever source you can where you are. And I once worked with a very wise doctor in Canada, and he always said that the only sustainable energy is local energy. So pick up what you can find where you are and do the best of that. And it will be different wherever you are, but go find what it is and make use of that in a sustainable way.
Yeah, I think I could certainly speak for a lot of folks here that, I'd like to see a little bit more of an initiative here in the United States towards towards those types of things and ramping up our clean energy here. And actually, going through some of these technologies that you spoke about in the industry, I'm curious. When we look at other industries, the technologies that are really taking over are things like AI and blockchain, and your focus and a big focus in the clean tech industry is electrofuel, and I'm curious if you can kind of explain the difference for anyone watching that might not know the difference between say electrofuel as opposed to biofuel or renewable fuel and e-methanol.
Absolutely. But first of all, we can say that we use AI in our technology. We use blockchain in our tracking system, where we track the source of our energy or the source of our fuel to the end point of our fuel. So we use these technology to make our systems better and more efficient. But if we look at just biofuels and electrofuels to make it very simple, biofuels is essentially when you make a fuel from something that you, generally speaking, harvest. You can harvest sugarcane, you can harvest wood, you can harvest maize, you can harvest corn, whatever it is, and then you process it in a way that you get a fuel out of it. But essentially, the growing aspect has been done by nature, probably nature with a bit of fertilizer and some water, but you grow something, you squeeze it in some way, you take something out, whether it's oil or whatever the substance is, and you make a fuel from that. So that's the kind of the biofuels piece. The advanced biofuels is more or less the same thing, but you're a little bit wiser in which materials you choose, and you get a higher level of GHG reduction. Normally on advanced biofuels, you count 50%, some places 60% of reduction to be counted as an advanced biofuel. In electrofuel, it's really quite different. We take electricity that we source then from a wind farm or somewhere. We make hydrogen from that electricity, which means we split water. So water is hydrogen and oxygen. We split the hydrogen and oxygen. Now we have the hydrogen, which is a gas, which is a little bit complicated to keep track of as a gas form. So to make that gas more manageable, we collect CO2, carbon dioxide, the stuff that we love to hate because we have too much of it. We collect that CO2 in concentrated form from a pulp mill or a CHP plant, could be from anybody essentially emitting that. But we collect that CO2, and then we take the hydrogen and the CO2, put them together. Now they gas and gas, add pressure, add a little bit of heat, and run it through a catalyst. And out from this gas, we get a liquid. And the liquid is technically, it's methanol and water. And we then remove the water, and we have our methanol, which we call e-methanol or e-fuel. But when I heard about this thing the first time, I thought, this is just amazing. We take a gas that nobody wants, we take another gas that we create, and we get a fuel. And that's what we do. And that's what the process is. And that's what all the excitement is around PTX. Power to X, which could be anything, but power to liquid is what we do, or electrofuel. And that's what's going to go absolutely phenomenally big over the next 10 to 15 years. We're talking about millions and millions and millions of tons of this stuff that we need to replace the millions of tons of existing fuel in ships, trains, cars, buses, you name it.
It's really interesting. When I started looking into how the technology works and how the science works behind it, it's really fascinating. Some of the things you're working on there, and of course that I could imagine the growth that's needed to take a dent out of our current energy sources. What are some of the obstacles around scaling this type of business to reach that level where we can start taking away from some of those energy sources that aren't as sustainable, and move things like e-methanol into that?
I'd say the main obstacle is to get access to the carbon dioxide that comes out of somebody's plant facility, because they don't really know who we are or what we do or why we do it. I mean, we now speak to 20 different pulp mills in Sweden and ask them to please provide us with their CO2 that they are only sending through the chute and up into the air. So they have no use for it whatsoever. And we say, can we please use it? And they are still like nervous, because we're going to put a hole in their chimney. We're going to get inside their fence of their factory, and we're going to start to use the stuff that they've been calling waste for their whole entire life into something useful. But you cannot believe how difficult it is to get them to say yes to going with us and doing something. And that's going to be difficult for the first 2, 3, 4, 5, something like that. But once we've proven that not only that it works, because we absolutely know that it works, but we've proven that we can do it in somebody's facility without messing up their business, I think it's going to be a flood of companies that are going to come to us that are going to be interested in doing this. But it's a strange hurdle, because you would think it should be the easiest one, but it's the sort of the perception or the mindset of, should we really let these guys into our gate and mess with our process?
But I guess if I could add, another challenge is the price point, right? So we know that this greener type of fuel is going to be more expensive. So I mean, today we talk about perhaps 1 or 1.5 times more expensive, depending on how it will turn out. So we have to motivate whoever is going to be using it. In our case, we're targeting the marine industry, right? To say why would they pay so much more for the fuel they use? So I think ultimately that is also one of the challenges. And I think we all as a customers also have a huge role to play, because today marine industry actually transports about 80% of the global trade. So that basically means every other, if you buy 10 sneakers, 8 of them is traveling on water. And as a consumer, you do have a huge, responsibility in that regard to sort of demand for greener cargo, or perhaps also willing to pay. And we know from our internal research that it costs maybe $2.50 for a sneakers to be transported back to where you are. So that ultimately means maybe that cost being double. And do we as customers, accept that kind of price to reduce carbon emissions or not?
Absolutely, and that's going to be, I would imagine, an obstacle and a struggle that that you're going to have to balance going forward. And sort of. Sorry, go ahead.
We will get cheaper and cheaper, and the alternatives will get more and more expensive, and one day they will cross. And when they cross, we really take off. And we've said that we think that will happen around 2030. That's when we reach sort of a fossil fuel parity for our fuel. But to get there, we have to have those few leading edge companies who says, I want to be so sustainable. I want to be sustainable enough to be able to pay, or to be willing to pay, a little premium. And in the meantime, the government helps as well with part of the gap. So the government takes a bit of the gap. So sort of companies that want to be on the leading edge and be able to talk about how sustainable are, they take the rest of the gap. And that's what we believe will make it work for us. And I think what we also maybe add to that, though, is that we can mix our fuel. If you have 100% of fuel, we could take 10% of our fuel in somebody else's 100%. So you don't have to have the full load of the premium. You can gradually increase the greenness in your fossil fuel. And therefore you have kind of a soft transition into going sort of greener and greener with your fuel usage.
Absolutely. Well, Claes, Tuya, thank you again for sharing your time with us today. It's been a pleasure learning from your insights, and it's exciting to see where Liquid Wind stands in the industry and what you're doing for society, and looking forward to continuing your progress. I'm going to ask you one final question, and Claes kind of headed in that direction. I'm curious, where do you see the clean energy space in 10 years? You mentioned by 2030, we're going to see sort of this overlap. Where do you see the industry in 10 years from time?
Big question again. But I mean, what we've seen in solar and wind is that they have grown exponentially and much faster than anybody could imagine until today. So if we believe that we want to have 10 plants by 2030, well, if it's going to be exponential, maybe it's going to be 30 plants, 40 plants, who knows? But I think whether it's us or the industry in general, I think we're going to see a true escalation, because I think the sort of the holding back and the mindset of, is this important or not? I think we're over that one. At least if we look Europe and East, so to speak, we're definitely over it. I mean, and therefore I think it's all about how quickly can we make this happen, because we have to make it happen quickly. So I can't give a number, but it's going to be hugely much more bigger than it is today.
Awesome. Well, once again, thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Take care.
All right.